What perfectly true story of yours sounds like an outrageous lie? My grandfather brought a sword to the office and tried to behead my dad for a poor quarterly performance. Family businesses are tough. My grandfather has Alzheimer's dementia. Not sure. Asian family in Asia. Everyone denies mental issues. And before that incident, our family didn't know he was unraveling. Edit. Yeah. This story is so incredible that the whole family was in a dilemma about what to say to the doctors, lawyers, bankers, etc. when they needed to declare my grandfather was mentally unfit to make his own decisions. My dad was going, "What do I tell them? My dad tried to kill me? With a sword? Who's going to believe this?" I mean, even my dad thought the calls he got from his employees were part of a prank. Went to the office, got stopped by the freaked out security guards asking him what they should do, and finally realized it was for real. Everyone just hid and waited it out until my grandfather got tired of waiting and went home. It even took a few more crazy incidents before the entire family believed my dad. Most of his siblings thought it was an elaborate ploy to take over the company for the longest time, and it nearly turned into a crazy court case. A friend of mine told me about how he went to KFC and they ran out of chicken. The Churches around the corner was flooded and the guy in the back was like, "Did KFC run out of chicken again?" Like this happens on some sort of regular basis. My mom was pissing me off and being nasty and childish to my stepdad. I was in the field with my horse later and she came in and I whispered, "Give her hell." He promptly went up to her and bit her. And then again. He kept being super menacing to her, following her around with his ears flat against his head etc. Even though usually he was the most laid back animal ever. Eventually I went over to him, patted him and said, "Leave it," and he stopped. A year or so later he kicked the ever living it out of a pony who slammed into me in the field and knocked me over. I was fine, just covered in mud. But once again he didn't stop menacing this pony until I went up to him and said, "That's enough now. Stop." Even typing that sounds like total BS, but I swear it's totally true. Edit. The horse was doing the biting menacing, not my stepdad. Taylor Swift pushed me out of a swing when I was in 3rd grade. I used to go over to my neighbor's house to play just about every afternoon. He had an older sister and she just happened to be friends with the unpopular Taylor Swift. I went over one day doing typical 1st grader things on the swing set with my neighbor. When they came out, Taylor demanded that we get out and let her swing. Rebel me said no and she said, "Fine then, I'll push you." The next thing I know I had a skinned up knee and a mouth full of dirt. I ended up going to the same middle school and high school as her and always heard about how great she is. To me, she'll always be that itch that pushed me out of a swing. TL. Doctor, I refused to give up my swing to Taylor Swift so she shoved me out. Edit. After asking my parents and doing math, I was actually in 3rd grade at the time. Edit 2. I forgot to mention this, but since she became famous she has contributed quite a few times to the community. One donation, coincidentally enough, was a playground. Link. Just up the street from my apartment in San Francisco, there was one of those fast food restaurants that was either a KFC or a Taco Bell, depending on the angle from which it was viewed. The establishment was a frequent stopping point for students coming from the nearby college, and those students were a frequent target for a remarkably bright crow. Now, on most days, the bird in question would just hang around the restaurant, as well as other ones nearby, and scavenge for scraps. Every once in a while, I saw this happen twice, and had it happened to me once, it would enact a much more complex scheme than simply going through the gutter. The crow had apparently discovered that money could be exchanged for food, so it would wait until it saw a likely mark, squawk at them to get their attention, then pick up and drop a coin. Anyone who responded would witness the bird hopping a few feet away, then following its victim toward the source of its next snack. When the crow approached me, it dropped a nickel on the ground. I stooped, picked up the coin, and then jumped slightly when the bird made a noise that sounded not unlike taco. Needless to say, bought that crow a taco. The final out-of-pocket cost for me, minus the nickel, was something like $1.15. Even so, I figured a bird that smart deserved a reward simply for existing. Of course, that was probably exactly what I was supposed to think. TLDR. A crow paid me 5 cents to buy it a taco. moving interstate, all our belongings on the little trailer, pulled over the side of the road so my soak could pee, too close to the side of the road, and the trailer slid down a small ditch. Not enough to wreck the car but too steep for our little car to pull out. Next thing you know, a white minibus pulls up, and out jumps a half dozen guys who were a weightlifting team from I think Argentina. It was 25 years ago. Not sure now. They lifted our trailer up onto the road, climbed back in their van, and drove off. One time as I was leaving the mall I balled up a piece of paper and flicked it at the trash can and hit a fly in midair. I played 11 degrees of random internet separation and wound up at myself. I was working on my GeoCities website in 1998 on campus at UT Austin. I was looking for design ideas to poach HTML code from a friend's website, but he didn't have anything I didn't. So I went to his list of 20 plus friends, picked a random one, and looked at that guy's page for design ideas. Then I thought, I wonder where in the world I'd end up if I did friend of a friend 10 times like that. New York? China? Ice? So I did. Went to that guy's friends list, picked a random one, went to that person's friends list, and so on. The 10th person was an employee of UT, so I didn't even make it off campus, let alone to another country, but he had a webcam in his office, one of those that refreshed an image every 30 seconds. The lights were off. There were open mini blinds, but I couldn't really see much beyond them. Then I noticed that he listed his office number, FAC 222, Floor Academic Center, 2nd floor, room 222. I realized that I was doing all of this from a computer on the 2nd floor of Floor Academic Center. I looked up to see that the computer I was on was at the end of an aisle directly across from room 222. I went to the window, open many blinds, lights off, webcam on top of his monitor. I go back to my computer to see my own face in the webcam image peeking in his window. I beat an Olympic medalist at volleyball. I usually leave out the fact that she wasn't an Olympian for volleyball. My rabbit jumped over our cat once. He used to get out all the time so eventually we just let him roam free. He wasn't afraid of the cat so the cat left him alone, thinking he was a freak of nature that smelled like a rabbit and looked like a rabbit but wasn't. One day the cat decided what the hell, that must be a rabbit, so he goes in for the pounce. Rabbit sails straight over his head and nonchalantly goes back to eating grass. The cat checked to see if anyone was looking then slunk away in shame. I almost choked to death trying to warm up a frog I had picked up. It was early spring and I found a small frog moving slowly along my parents' pond. I picked it up and cupped it in my hands and held it up in my hands to breathe warm air on it and it jumped into my mouth. It lodged in my throat and I could feel it struggling as I hawked it up. Full stop. Came home late one night to find David Bowie laying on my bed watching Mary Tyler Moore on my small black and white TV. Owned an after hours club in Nick, and my boyfriend met him and brought him home to hang out. I was waiting for a client in a coffee shop, and I saw a man exit an apartment on a higher floor from the balcony. He sorta abseiled down in his undies and ran across the courtyard. Edit. I forgot I took a pic. An internet conspiracy theorist implicated me in 9/11. I spent 2 years as a child in a Christian school in Guatemala that turned out to be a cult. They would lock us up for weeks in tiny cages isolated out in the jungle because we were suspected of having bad thoughts. www.shimberberis.com. One time, someone accidentally shipped me $20,000 worth of boa constrictors. That was a very surprising day lol. Edit. Since so many people are asking, I figured I'd tell the story. I did buy a single boa, worth way less than $20k, from this breeder, but he mixed up the shipping label with that of a gentleman who purchased a high-end breeding colony. There were 11 designer boas in the box, and they all made it safely to their intended recipient in the end. Now the boa I bought was almost killed by an idiot FedEx driver during the mix-up, but that's a different story. Edit 2. Okay, the gist of the second story is that despite having a guaranteed delivery time of before 10 AM, the delivery guy left her in the back of his truck until near 6 PM on a 95-degree day. By the time we tracked him down, actually had to call them and intercept the driver. She was in bad shape, ataxic, severely dehydrated. She couldn't hold her body up. The stress caused her to develop a respiratory infection, which took 2 months of injectable antibiotics to treat. Happily, she recovered fully and is doing well today. My house was broken into while I was asleep on the couch in the living room. I captured my would-be burglar with a battle axe replica that my roommate had on the wall. I made him call 911 on his own phone since I couldn't hold onto him and the axe and a phone at the same time. He tried to get away a few times. A very surprised 911 dispatcher sent the police, who eventually got there, arrested my prisoner, and thanked me for not chopping him up. I located a multi-million-dollar G deposit 2 years ago and have no plans to tell anyone where it is because it is on sacred land. Almost 20 years ago, my father sold his photo camera to buy some booze. He was an alcoholic and an abusive piece of it, among other equally funny things. Inside the camera bag there was a piece of paper with a handmade aperture and shutter speed chart. I had drawn little circles in that paper when I was a child. Fast forward 15 years. There's a pawn shop near the place where I work, and from time to time I go there to see what hidden gems I can find. One day there was a camera that looked quite similar to the one my father sold. I bought it on a whim, without even checking if it worked properly, just because it looked like the one he undersold. Once at home, I took a closer look, cleaned it properly and searched the bag. Yes, you know where this is going. There it was, the paper with the chart and my little circles and blue biro. I sat on the sofa for a moment just to let the WTF moment sink in. That camera is now in a place of honor among my other cameras. Edit. Wow. This is my highest rated comment ever. Thank you very much. Edit 2. Some of you asked for a pic of the camera. Here it is. Edit 3. English is not my first language. Please don't look too close at my grammar and writing skills. I'm working on it. My dad tried to smuggle a diamond out of Sierra Leone, but the guys helping him get it through customs ran off with a diamond. Edit. Wow, I didn't expect to get this kinda response. Here's the full story for those who want to know. So my dad was working for a company that works in mining in Africa. He went out to inspect how the Sierra Leone operation was running. While over there he bought a diamond off a local chief who worked with the company. He bought it for much lower than its actual worth, so decided not to declare it customs and try and smuggle it through. People at the company told him what to do. Pay off one guard and give him the diamond. He would then meet another guard with the diamond beyond all the checks. The second guard never showed, and that's the story. When I was a kid, we live about a mile from a huge world famous zoo. Being so close, I eventually figured out a way to get in for free. This being long enough ago, there were no security cameras, so I started going in after it was closed. Doing it so often I figured out the guard's schedule and knew when it was safe to be there and not get caught. Me being a kid, I took my bike in there in case I needed a fast getaway. Me being a very bad kid, I stole beers from my brother's hiding place to stick in a backpack for private picnics in the zoo. PETA will downvote me for this, but I shared beers and peanut butter sandwiches with a large female African elephant so often that she welcomed me with a hug when I showed up on my bike. I went to a house party once. People were all around the place. Living room, dining room, bedroom, just drinking and chatting. At some point, one guy started to hook up with a girl. They went to the bedroom too. Well, to dark. When they got there were 2 guys and 1 girl. They realized a couple was going to use the bedroom, so they started to leave. One of the guys, though, turned off the lights while leaving. But he realized the bedroom got really dark, so he closed the door and managed to stay inside. Hidden, the couple started to make out on the bed, taking their clothes off, and my friend was watching. Hidden, jerking off. At some point, your eyes get used to the dark, right? The girl was on all fours, while the guy was banging from behind. Then, all of a sudden, she screams, "Oh my god, there's someone here." My friend then started to apologize, putting his D away, while turning on the lights. That's when the 3 of them saw it. Another ninja jerker managed to stay inside the bedroom, at the corner, masturbating. They both apologized and left the room. I was out clubbing with friends one night, and as we were leaving the first bar we walked down an alleyway. I all of a sudden stopped and walked back to where there was a little old Italian man, because I could smell fresh chilies. In the back tray of his ute, there were mounds of these fresh chilies. I told him they were beautiful chilies, asked if he grew them himself etc. While my friends begged me to keep walking, he asked if I wanted some. I love chili so I said yes, expecting he'd give me a couple. He grabs this plastic bag and fills it with about 50 chilies. I ask him how much money he wants for them but he refuses, and with a hug sends me on my way. I only had a small purse on me, so I just carried the bag with me as we went about our night. We ended up going into 2 nightclubs. The bouncers at both asked to check in my bag, then laughed when I just said to them, "It's a long story." They let me keep them, so I just held them as I danced and drank the night away. 4th grade. We're playing kickball inside for pay because it's rainy. We're in a pretty standard basketball gym with hoops at each end and bathroom locker rooms in the far end. The kind with outdoors, just the long out and back hallway for privacy. Now for the unbelievable part. During our game on my first kick I looked at a friend and said I'm aiming for the hoop. Ball rolls up. I run up, wind up, and unload the most perfect kick I've ever kicked. The ball sails high and straight and true. It hits the backboard, does a little dance around the rim and plops right on through. I'm so stunned at the spectacle that I'm just standing on first watching it happen. I'm safe. Second kick. I say, I'm doing it again. I do. Everyone is stunned by this one. I'm still a bit stunned it worked. Made it to second this time. Third kick. My final chance at the plate. Kicking it at the basket is cool, but inside the park homers are cool too. I'm not super fast so I needed to employ trickery. The outfield crew consisted of all dudes, so I aim for the girls' locker room. The kick sails long and just a bit left of the locker room door, but it lands with a bit of spin and bounces perfectly into the girls' locker room and down the little out and back hallway. No one is in the locker room, but all of the 4th grade boys are afraid of getting yelled at, so none of them try to retrieve the ball. Meanwhile I'm closing on home plate looking to break up our tied game. I scored. We won. For any former 4th graders from Hudson Pep in Longview, Texas that feel like corroborating my story, this happened in like 1993 to 1994. I watched a man with 2 peg legs walk up a harbor ramp at low tide. It was one of the singly most inspirational events I've witnessed. Edit. Harbor ramps connect land to the docks which move up and down on pilings as the tide changes. When the tide is out the ramp is at a steep incline. At high tide the ramp is nearly level with the land. This particular incident occurred on an abnormally low tide where the ramp was at an 90-degree angle. I did not offer help as clearly a man with 2 pegged legs is the captain of his own vessel. He achieved this great feat of human mastery by placing one peg in front of the other while using the railing as leverage and pure grit and determination for traction. He offered a level glance at me as I passed him on my way down and the heavy rain motivated us forward without conversation. I've mentioned his story to people before and invariably the response is either I know of him or duck off, let's get whiskey drunk. Any more of his story that I know is lost to the walls of dingy fishing bars that were once saloons. My stepdaughter acquired a guinea pig that, big surprise, turned out to be pregnant. She gave birth to 2 normal babies and a runt that was too weak to walk or drink milk from the mother. The little guy was on the way out so I got my stepdaughter to hold the mother in a sort of sitting position while I squeezed some milk out of a nipple that was about the size of a decent pimple. I jammed the baby onto the nipple and he finally got the idea, drinking enough to kickstart his growth. While we held mom still for about 20 minutes, he lived and we eventually gave the 4 of them to someone else. Shortly after a fox broke into their hutch and ate all of them except the runt. 1. I killed someone when I was 4 years old. Accident. I opened back door of a car in Japan to the sidewalk but a motorcyclist driving in that space between the curb and road slammed into it. Spoiler. 2. I was disowned by my parents because of IT grades. Asian parents who cared about me more for academic professional success rather than as a human being. They may or may not have been narcissists, but I don't truly know. They won't contact me anymore. Spoiler. Formatting. I was doing acid with a friend in a rather isolated area. We were lying in the grass on a hill maybe 100-200 m away from the nearest path where people would sometimes walk by. At some point an older white-haired man with weirdly dirty pants walked all the way up to us. After some initial questions about whether we had seen his sheep, which at that point we didn't realize was a rather weird question, he asked us what we thought was most important in life. Friend? Friendship? White-haired stranger? No. God. At that point he started to glow from the inside in my perception, and during the long monologue about God he proceeded to give us I couldn't stop laughing, which I still feel a little bad about. And yes, he was real. He handed out flyers in the end that we still treasure. I will never forget Johann, the shepherd. TLDR. We were tripping balls on acid when an old man went out of his way to try to missionize us. A seagull once dropped a whole mackerel on my head. I smelled like dead fish all day. When I was a little kid I convinced a friend to restart Pokemon Blue and trade me a Squirtle, claiming he'd be able to just reload his previous save anyway. I knew full well he'd lose all his progress, but I wanted to catch them all. After we traded and he realized, crushed, that he'd lost everything, I told him he must have messed up somehow. Then, around 15 years later on Christmas Eve I posted this story anonymously in a confessions type thread on 4chan. He was in the thread. By insane coincidence I got a chance to apologize for my misdeed as an adult. I would have screen capped it for posterity, but I was a little nervous to keep records because he had to reveal a bunch of personal info to prove he knew me. Suffice to say, even the people in the thread didn't believe it wasn't just me acting both parts. I went to Disney World when I was 7 and split my eyebrow open sliding down a slide. Blood everywhere. Ruined my shirt. Disney World in all their sympathetic glory gave me a new t-shirt that was way too big and nothing else. I crashed my car on the way to homecoming, and my date and I rode up to the venue in the back of a police car. I received a car as a tip while working as a cocktail waitress, without extra service. I found out he had overheard me talking to co-workers about not having a car and lining up rides. Also, I was trying to save money to go back to college, since I did poorly the quarter before. Yes, still on the quarter system, and my parents stopped footing the bill. He paid his tab with his 2 friends and left me a $50 tip. Note, this was over 15 years ago and the tip was almost the cost of the bill. The car was delivered to me at work the next day by his lawyer and I never saw the man again. At first I wouldn't accept it because I wondered his motives and what strings would be attached. The lawyer assured me it was just a kind gesture and his clients wanted nothing in return other than that I return to school and finish my degree. Now it wasn't a fancy, flashy, brand new car, but it was still a car, only couple years old. Come to find out the man owned quite a few car dealerships as well as all of the company. I will not name the area. I never tell this to people, because hell, I probably wouldn't believe it either. My family lived in Hong Kong for a while when I was younger. From what I understand we had to take a ferry to get to some sort of beach-like area to spend a day at. On our way back to the mainland I was the first on the ferry, with this man assisting all the kiddies back on the ferry over the gap between the dock and the boat. I turn around to welcome my tiny adorable brother, who's like 21-2 years old, onto this exciting ferry ride when this mother ducker goes to jump onto the boat and slips down right through the crack and proceeds to fall into the ocean. My mom jumps in to save him, and starts freaking out, splashing and yelling at the guy who dropped Kevin into the ocean. Seriously yelling get away from my family, as he's trying to get them into an inner tube and to safety. They get back on the ferry. Brother's head is all ducked from barnacles and everyone is alive. Cool. Mom calls dad who is in Nick for business and tells him the story. Dad was freaked out because he had a dream that night that Kevin fell off a building. With the time difference the 2 events would have been happening at similar times. Always weirded everyone out. Edit. 2. 1/2 guys. Tried fixing my IT storytelling. Or I had a 8-9 hours brain surgery with complications. To fix one of the results of those complications I needed surgery on my optic nerve. Both eyes. It didn't take and I needed it again. I also had 2 lumbar punctures which took literally 8 attempts each. Needle in the spine. To get fluid. The original surgery was to remove a brain tumor. It grew back. Lived alone for a year when I was 8. TLDR first generation Asian immigrants. Mom goes back to the motherland to renew US visa. Gets stuck. I'm sent back ahead of time thinking it was going to be a couple week delay. Family friends helped me get settled back into a routine for school. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into a year. Mum comes back to find me 40 PDS heavier cause 8-year-old me was eating 3 frozen dinners a night. Also almost burned down the house at least on 4 separate occasions. Discovered unlimited amounts of porn. And my father was a piece of it. Vanilla Ice left me a happy birthday voicemail. 15 years ago, I was friends with a guy who is a professional guitar tech and travels all over with different bands. He was in Miami with a fairly successful band, and Vanilla was at the show. Later, on the tour bus, my friend called me at like 3 AM to wish me happy birthday and handed the phone over to Vanilla Ice and he wished me happy birthday. Unfortunately, my service provider's voicemail system only allowed you to save a message for 7 days, and I couldn't figure out how to save it any other way, so it's disappeared into the ether. I once nearly killed my older brother with a spear. He and I were playing cowboys and Indians, and being the only one with a BB gun, he was by default the cowboy. I had about a 5-foot long stick sharpened to a dull point on one end, and was the Indian. He walked up to me, summer in Georgia, where I had a pair of shorts between me and the Lord, and shot me point blank with that BB gun barrel full of sand, and then took off running. He went across the yard, turned right at the fence and continued running hard away from me. I didn't even think about the consequences. Took the spear and made a javelin throw that an Olympian would be proud of, and hit him in the back of the neck at between 35 and 40 yards away. He faceplants with the spear standing upright like a proud flag I had planted on the moon. Then the spear falls over. The tip of the spear went between 2 vertebrae in his neck. The spear fell because the tip broke off in his neck. I celebrated the victory, then walked over to see what remained. We ended up in the emergency room, where the doctors decided not to operate, but rather to let the spear point work its way out on its own. It took 25 years to completely do that. My punishment for this act was that I received a BB gun, figuring that the worst I could do with that was to put his eye out, but that at least we would be on level footing in combat. Child rearing in the 60s was a different thing, and having a big family, built-in spares, helped a lot. Spencer Horseman, the magician from America's Got Talent, lives in Baltimore and performs at a bar in the city. We went and saw him perform. He was great. After the show I had to use the bathroom, and as I'm peeing, he comes in to pee as well. I go over and wash my hands and they have one of those hand blowers that is activated by hand motion. I say, "Hey Spencer, check this trick out." I wave my hands in front of the blower and say abracadabra and it starts. I turn and say, "See, I can do magic as well." Guy started laughing hysterically. I played hide and seek with Bigfoot. Okay, that's a simplification, so here's the whole story. I used to go to a camp in Colorado for 5 weeks every summer. It was totally remote. The nearest town was Florissant. The camp itself was around 8k acres if I remember correctly. The camp was split by gender, with the boys and girls camp probably a mile apart. The boys slept in army style canvas tents that slept about 5. Anyways, a tradition was the older boys, 15-16, would sneak out in the middle of the night and hike over to the girls' camp. We could not use paths or trails because the counselors and others would occasionally post up on those routes to catch us and drink and smoke. Most of us at that age had years of experience not only with the camp's layout, but with navigation and hiking. So one night we waited for our counselor to pass out and set off around midnight. Now keep in mind, in previous missions I had run into every animal in that part of the country. Suffice it to say, I knew my it. About 20 minutes into our hike we heard what sounded like a foot patrol and our small group split up. I took off in my own direction and hid myself and made no sound. After I decided it was clear, I got up and started back on my own path, figuring, since we couldn't yell and didn't have radios, I wouldn't meet up with my colleagues again until the rendezvous point with the girls. Then I saw it. At that point of my life I was about 6'1", and this thing had a foot on me. I still can't figure out this part, but it seemed to have very bright eyes, like an animal's nictitating membrane when hit with a light at night. The moon was very bright that night. It was hairy and massive. As I said earlier, I had run into bears on foot at night before. My initial reaction to that situation was not fright, but intrigue. This thing scared the absolute living it out of me. I froze. I knew I shouldn't run. I didn't want to trigger a predatory chase. On top of that, it made zero threatening gestures, noises or postures. I can't quite explain it, but I had an overwhelming sense that it was just curious or toying with me. So the only semi-rational action I could think of was slowly back off, not make eye contact and put something in between it and me. So I walked backwards and found a pine tree with a massive, low branch that was still attached but broken and slid under it in a feeble attempt to hide. When I looked back its direction, it was kind of just peeking from behind a tree. It hadn't moved closer. At this point from my cover I felt confident it could not see my eyes through the pine needles, so I watched intently. It just watched and slightly shuffled in place. I sat in that tree well under a branch for at least 3 hours just watching, and it did the same. I saw a similar but seemingly sturdier shelter behind me and reverse army crawled to it. It moved to another tree and we were back at the same situation. Eventually the adrenaline couldn't sustain me and the low from being that on edge for so long made me super tired. I drifted in and out of short naps until dawn, and there was enough light to see more clearly. I looked and it was gone. I sprinted back to my tent and snuck back in where all my partners in crime were already asleep. They made it to the girls and came back. None of them ever saw a counselor or me after we split up. It ducked with me for a while. Years later I was watching that stupid Bigfoot Hunters show and it showed a map of sightings over the past couple decades, and where my camp was had one of the highest rates in the country. No one ever believes me but Duck M. That's my story and I'm sticking to it. Edit. THX for the Gold Stranger. Just woke up. I'll try to reply to as much as possible. Edit 2. Yes, it was Sanborn Western Camps. Best place ever.